Hello and welcome to It's a Code U, mental health support for those working in healthcare. This is a podcast created for healthcare employees to explore not only issues relating to mental and emotional health, but also unique challenges that those working in healthcare are faced with. Your hosts are Adina Tucker, a licensed clinical social worker with Dartmouth Health, and Jennifer Hinsey, an MSW also with Dartmouth Health. Hello and welcome to It's a Code U. In this episode, we are going to be celebrating Pride Month by talking about LGBTQIA plus youth. We're going to discuss how many youth in the United States identify as being part of that community, what some mental health concerns are for that population, what's been shown to be the most helpful or supportive, how we can foster that kind of environment for those youth, and we'll also look at what concerns are for LGBTQIA plus youth when they come out to friends and family, and how you can best support your or any child that identifies. So let's start with some general information. Did you know that it's estimated in the US that as of 2020, there are almost 2 million LGBT youth ages 13 to 17? That's a statistic that's presented by the Williams Institute through the UCLA Law School. And according to the CDC, as of 2021 data, about 1 in 4 high school students identify as part of the LGBTQ community. Why is this important? Well, according to the CDC, those youth are at a greater risk for poor mental health, violence, and HIV than their non-LGBTQs. The information I'm going to share with you gives a little more insight about those youth is from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and that's developed by both the CDC, and the data is collected every 2 years among a nationally representative sampling of U.S. high school students. So in 2021, 69% of those youth reported feeling persistently sad and hopeless compared to their heterosexual peers, whose figure for that same measure was only 35%. And it's important to note that not all data sets include transgender or questioning youth, and this particular statistic didn't include transgender youth. During the pandemic, LGBTQ plus high school students were 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their heterosexual peers. This higher rate of suicidal ideation and attempts have been higher for this group pretty consistently. LGBTQ plus youth have also reported more instances of being bullied or threatened with violence. And out of the youth in the US who have HIV, LGBTQ plus are affected the most. And despite this being the case, only 51% of schools across the US include information about safe sex that is relevant to this population of students. According to the Trevor Project, youth who felt high social support from their family attempted suicide at half the rate of those who experienced low or moderate support. And then also from the Trevor Project, youth who live in a community that's accepting of LGBTQ individuals reported significantly lower rates of attempting suicide. So the last part we're going to talk about is going to be information about youth and coming out, which is the decision to share aspects of one's sexual, physical, romantic, and emotional attractions with others. And this information comes from the Trevor Project as well. And it's important to note that this is a dynamic process. It's just as valid for someone to only come out to a few people they trust as it is to fully be out with everybody. It's also helpful to note that coming out does come with a risk if there's rejection and harm from others. And some research has indicated that youth that come out between the ages of 12 to 17 could be at a higher risk for suicidal ideation versus those who wait until they are in early adulthood. And in their research brief, the Trevor Project cites that out of youth that came out before age 13, those with high family support only reported about an 11% rate of attempting suicide versus those with low or moderate family support reported a 24% rate of attempting suicide. So that's nearly double the rate for those youth who felt little or moderate family support. For those who were 13 or older, the risk was about the same, with the low support reporting twice the amount of attempts than those who reported high family support. So what we want to do today is look at how we can create a safe and supportive environment. How do we create a loving, safe, connected home environment? And that is the question we are asking today. And we have once again with us Pam Bertolino, LICSW, who has over 30 years of experience as a therapist providing couples and family therapy. And we're very excited to have her here to answer our questions and help us figure this one out. So, Jennifer, I'll let you start.
Thank you and welcome, Pam. It's great to have you back with us again. So first, I'll just ask, given some of the statistics that Adina mentioned in the beginning, and that school is such a big part of the life of kids and teenagers, do you think that parents should try to become more involved in school and push for more inclusive spaces, clubs? And if so, what specifically would you suggest?
Yes, I do. I think first and foremost, education needs to start at home, right? So parents should be talking about Pride Month and how everyone deserves to have the same rights as everybody else. And if they have a positive experience of pride, that this might shape their feelings about diversity and inclusion throughout their lives. But in terms of school, some ways that they can be involved is to look at the school's progress, maybe ask the principal and the teacher, what are you doing to be more inclusive? How do they handle slurs, for example? Because there's a lot of bullying at school. So how would they handle that? Is there a punishment? Is there an educational component? You want to know what they're doing. And you want to know if the teachers and the administrative staff are receiving training and how they can support families of LGBTQ plus youth. Some more things are, does the library contain books? There's actually an organization called Book Nook. It's a reading list that specializes in family inequality and those kinds of books. So you might want to look on that list and then check with your school library and find out if they have any of those books. Other things are, you could find out who on committees like the PTA are LGBTQ plus and what are their recommendations on inclusivity. I mean, there's a lot of information. Another one is to fix school paperwork. So instead of saying mother or father, you want to say parent or caregiver so that everybody does feel included. And if you happen to be part of the LGBTQ plus community, come out, because I think you can be a good example and help with other people to come out and be involved. So I think you really have to get involved in school and make it a friendly place.
Those all make a lot of sense to me because I do feel like some of the language and things isn't very inclusive and can be another way that we have microaggressions specifically with this population. How would you suggest that parents broach topics like dating and safe sex to be inclusive of LGBTQIA plus teens, especially if their child hasn't come out to them yet?
Yeah, I don't really think it matters if the child has come out or not. I think sex ed should be inclusive to include LGBTQ plus community and also heterosexual kids because they all experiment. But I think the biggest thing is don't assume that a teen's sexual orientation or gender identity is just about sex. It's about things other than that. It's about how they view themselves, who they're attracted to, how they dress, what kind of hair they have, all that kind of thing. So when you're talking about it, the research shows that you should talk about specific sex acts, not just about lesbian sex or gay sex. You should also talk about birth control, emergency contraception, periods and gynecological care, particularly for trans boys, because they need to have that information. You want to talk about sexual health in terms of values and respect, that kind of thing, and how to be in a healthy relationship. And GLSEN, which is an organization, Gay and Lesbian Straight Education Network, say that LGBTQ plus youth, like what you said, have limited access to useful sexual health information. The other things they should be educated about, like all kids, are HIV, STDs, and non-gendered language. And be prepared to counter misinformation. One example I read was that porn sex and real sex are not the same. And so if kids are just trying to figure all that out, they might have the wrong impression. And it's not a one-time talk. It's something that has to continue. It's a continued thing. It's not you sit down and have this talk and it's done. You might cover one or two of the topics mentioned and then pick it up at another time. But I think the key is that you have to do your homework. And I think it's educating all kids, not just LGBTQ plus kids.
No, I was going to say that's actually a lot of what you said makes a lot of sense to me because I know even, well, especially with kind of sex being a lifelong conversation, starting with these are the body parts we all have and going from there. And I feel like probably in creating a safe environment, I know with my own kids, the book that I would use was called It's Not the Stork. And it went over body parts and kind of how babies are made, but it also talked about different types of families. So like sometimes there are two mommies, sometimes there are two daddies, and even the different ways to get a baby, artificial insemination, adoption, all those things. So I think even probably incorporating those kinds of things, but I think that makes a lot of sense to just kind of cover all the gamuts of safe sex and not really pigeonhole it into, well, lesbian sex is like this and whatever, but just like, because kids do also experiment. And I feel like people, especially younger people, are a lot more open with kind of figuring out what they're into, and having all of the best information is probably good for us to do as parents.
Absolutely.
And I think too, handling it that way really takes away any shame or stigma that maybe they heard through school or through anywhere, really. It just helps normalize it as sex is just sex. We're all people and sex is just sex. So I think it's great. Now, some LGBTQ plus individuals, they don't come out until they're out of the house or as adults. So, how do you foster a loving environment that will communicate to your child that they are loved so that if they aren't in a place to come out yet, they still know that they will be loved and accepted for who they are?
So I think you want to show them other types of families. Like Adina was just saying, I really love the idea of that book that explains different types of families. And there was one example I read about, and it said something to the effect of a family was at some kind of occasion and someone made a derogatory remark about the LGBTQ plus community, and an uncle was laughing about it or something like that. And so when the child got home, one of the parents or the caretakers asked, "What did you think about that?" Just to get the child's thoughts and then to open up the discussion. Like, I think everybody should be treated fairly and equally, and it's not okay to make fun of certain people or other people. So I think you have to have that general kind of atmosphere in your home. I know for me, when my kids were growing up, one of my best friends was gay and she was married, and so they were around a lot. So it wasn't a thing. It was just like normal. Those are our aunts, and that's that. So I think to expose kids, and then if you really want to get into it further, for parents, their goal is to be accepting and supportive. They don't have to approve, they don't have to do any of that stuff. They just have to accept and support. Like, have pride flags around, go to parades, do research, learn, but above all, to be kind.
I appreciate that thought, and I think that something that I will say that I've noticed is that I think that sometimes, or at least I feel from talking to friends that I have who are gay and all the things and have talked about coming out in their fear and stuff, is that you can kind of get a good idea sometimes how somebody might react, or maybe not get a good idea, but you might have an impression of how someone might react to that news based on the way they talk about other things. Even if they don't come right out and say, well, being gay is wrong and I don't like it, or whatever they might say, other attitudes about things could lead people to kind of use context clues and make a guess. And maybe that guess would be wrong. But I think, especially, obviously, you can tell by my voice, I'm in the South. And a lot of the feedback that I've gotten is, well, I'm going to be disowned. Like, I'm not going to have a family anymore. And I remember having a conversation with another adult saying, I think that maybe you should watch some of the things you say because your child is listening to that, and they may be afraid that if they were to share this with you, they would be rejected or disowned. And then they were like, well, I would never do that. Well, based on the things you say, that might not be the impression that your child has. So I think that's important too. The same way, like just watching what you're saying, and also just creating an environment of acceptance and love and openness, I think is is really key to letting your child know, or any child in your life, that like you're a safe space and that no matter what, you're loved and supported. Or at least that's what I think. I don't know what you guys think about that.
Well, yeah, I agree with that because coming out can be really stressful. So you want to encourage your kids and you want to praise them and thank them for trusting you with this. And if you're not ready to have a further discussion about it, you don't have to. You can table it and do some research and do some reading and educate yourself and then come back to it. And you may not understand all of it, but that's where education and supportive resources come in. There are a ton of resources, and we can talk about that later if you want, but you have to give yourself space also. I think we have a vision of what our kids are going to be, and maybe that's not what they are. Maybe you thought you were going to have tons of grandchildren, and maybe you're not because of your child's LGBTQ plus status, and it's okay to be sad about that or to grieve about it. But children have to be their authentic selves. It doesn't change who you thought they were. You know what I mean? It just, they're the same person. Adina, I just wanted to say a few things about what being part of the LGBTQ plus community is not, and go over some of the myths for people out there. So it's not a sin. It's not a disease or a mental condition or a hormonal problem. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's not an imagination or unreal. It's not a phase. It's not confusion. It's not unnatural or a problem to be fixed. So, I mean, those I think are some of the common misconceptions that some parents may have. So I just wanted to mention that.
I appreciate that, Pam. I think those are all things that need to be said and reminded to folks. I think it's great.
And I have a really cool quote that I got from one of my resources, and it's for parents. And I just wanted to read it because I think it's really kind of poignant. We are still the same person we were before we came out to you. There's nothing wrong with us. We are as capable at feeling emotion and as deserving of our parents' love and support. And it just says it's written by a queer kid. So I thought that was kind of sums everything up.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Love that.
I can understand being afraid that your child is going to face adversity. I can understand that. And that's kind of my full stop with it, because like I feel like my hope is that most parents had children to love them and to see. I think one of the most rewarding things and exciting things about being a parent is watching who these little people become, like what they do with their life, what makes them happy, all of those things, and just being lucky enough to be a part of it. And I feel like to not create an environment where your child feels safe enough to make mistakes, but safe enough to also be themselves and be accepted is kind of a hard thing to think about. And I know most of us are just doing the best we can. So hopefully if somebody's listening and they're like, oops, I might have said this thing one time, I think it's never too late to admit that you're human and that you learn and grow. And I think that it's important to have those conversations with our kids, because too often I think kids put their parents up on pedestals as if they're superhuman, and they're not. We are all human, just making mistakes and putting our foot in our mouth and learning and hopefully growing and being better people day by day.
Yep. Well said. So I know we wanted to talk a little bit about explaining LGBTQ plus to children. Shall I go into that?
Please do. Yeah.
So the first thing is that we have to educate ourselves, right? So the number one is gender means sex assigned at birth, and that's what it means in all the socially constructed rules and boundaries that society assigns and all that kind of thing. That's what gender means. Gender identity is how an individual views themselves. For example, like who you're attracted to. For kids, it's who you might have a crush on. And then gender expression is how a person presents themselves to the world, their hair color, their clothing, all that kind of stuff. So I think we have to, before we can even start to educate our kids, we have to understand that stuff ourselves. But the research says that children often know their gender identity by ages 3 to 5. And one thing for kids to understand is that nobody can label it for them. It's how you see yourself and how you feel on the inside. So I have some just different age groups and how you could start to teach them. So obviously, first is to start at an early age. Just be open, age appropriate, and the discussion should be ongoing. For preschool kids, simple, concrete, only answer questions that are asked. And it's kind of the same thing as you would do when you're talking about other subjects that are difficult to talk about, like sex. School age, ages like 6 to 12, you want to focus on treating people with respect, healthy relationships with friends, their bodies, romantic relationships. And that's when kids start to have crushes from ages like 10 to 13. So that's when kids might say, I have a crush on another girl, if it's a girl, and that kind of thing. And that's when they usually start to maybe say things out loud. There's also a lot of, and then for high school, it's all about respect, no bullying, safe sex, and to stand up for others. Don't use terms as insults, use correct pronouns, and use transgender names and not dead names. And then I have some resources for ages 3 to 8. There's a really good picture book. It's called Tango Makes Three. And there are just so many resources out there, and we can go over them at the end if you want.
Yeah, I'll add those in our resources at the end in the show notes.
So, Pam, I love all the resources that you have talked about so far. And I know that with busy as a lot of parents are, they might really be interested in trying to learn more about LGBTQ plus topics and how to broach that with their kids. But maybe they aren't in a place where they can sit down and do a lot of reading in their free time, the limited free time they have.
Yeah, I feel like I have a ton. There's like YouTube channels, there's videos, there's organizations. I think Adina mentioned the Trevor Project, and they also have a hotline, so maybe mention that. Yes, there are so many how they could maybe broach some of these topics. There's the Trevor Project, and that's probably the most popular publication. And they also have an 800 number just in terms of safety for kids who might be trying to come out. That number is 866-488-7386. There's PFLAG, Parents, Families, or Friends of Lesbians and Gays. There's Planned Parenthood. There's the Human Rights Campaign, and GLSEN, which I think I mentioned before. There are just so many resources out there. And I think people may not know about that, but if you just wanted to get an overview, you could get onto the Join PFLAG, it's PFLAG, or get onto their website, and there's just a myriad of information. So you could kind of pick and choose about what might be helpful for you.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to mention PFLAG as well. They have a lot of resources for parents, especially about like supporting your children or teens and coming out, and just other things that are super helpful. Different support groups or ways to get involved. Like I know that when we go to Pride, there's always someone there that says like mom with a t-shirt, it says like mom hugs or dad hugs for those who maybe don't have access to those. So there's really good ways to get involved and support and be an ally, even if you don't have a child who's in that group of people.
Yeah, and I think that teaches your children, whether or not they're part of the community or not, just to respect people and treat all people fairly.
Great.
So it's a great lesson.
No, for sure. I think that it's often sad to me because I go to a lot of pride events and take my kids, that my experience within the community has been that everyone's so loving and accepting and supportive, and for that community to not feel that themselves is super unfortunate. And hopefully that's something that's changing as society is maybe changing, and parents are learning to kind of open their minds a little bit and learn and grow.
I sure hope so.
Me too.
Yeah. Well, so from both of your perspectives. I mean, since you both are parents, I mean, are there, have PTAs become more inclusive? I mean, are there any like parent led events or just even organizing in schools that you all know of for LGBTQ plus kids?
I think there are in some of the more progressive schools. My kids are in their 20s, so they've been out for a little bit. Definitely at colleges, there are. But I would say we're in North Carolina, and I don't think there was anything growing up for the kids, like elementary, middle school, or high school. I think they were left to kind of figure it out
Mhm.
themselves. So, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, right. And you know what you see in the news typically are all of the anti LGBTQ movements led by parents in school systems. So I'm sure there's got to be something out there, but if there's not, perhaps any parents listening now, maybe that's another great way to show support for your child, any child that's in the LGBTQ plus community, is getting involved with school with the notion that you're trying to show that active support, that overt support for that community. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, and my experience has been kind of the same, that some of the more progressive communities
Yeah.
surround. I don't know if, I don't know. I don't think the middle schools have any sort of group, but the high schools may in my county, but I know the surrounding county is much more progressive. So I know there's a teen group that's not associated with the schools that is just part of the local Pride nonprofit that does have some things for kids where they get together and play games and have pizza. And it's kind of like a hangout slash support group like once a month. So I know there are those things available, but I think just like teaching our children to be good humans is kind of
Yes.
where is a kind of a good place to start, because that also lets them know that
Mm-hmm.
they're loved and supported. The kids are loved and supported whether or not they're lesbians or gay or trans. But it's also nice too, because I feel like I had one friend who was openly out in high school, which is much different now, I will say. It's very refreshing to see a lot of the younger kids supporting each other and creating environments, like little subset environments within the schools where they feel comfortable and feel supported. But what I felt like I saw him go through was that his own parents were not supportive and were maybe even abusive because of who he was, but he had was able to find solace in some of the parents of his friends who were accepting and loving and supportive. And so it's like, even if your child doesn't fit in this group, like
Mm-hmm.
maybe by showing them this is how we love on each other, maybe you're creating a safe space for somebody that's not your child, that's just kind of in your child's world where they may not otherwise have that. And that's nice too. That's a nice thing.
I love that, Adina. Yeah.
That really is. Yeah, that really is. And taking more of an overt or active stance involved in the school and with that message, I think could also be really helpful, because you're not just standing up for your own child who might be part of the LGBTQ plus community, but any child. And there are kids whose parents would rather have it shoved down or disappear, right? And I think when the majority of kids who, if you go to public or private, if you're not being homeschooled, who are, spending the majority of their life in the classroom or walking the walls of the school with their peers, to have an overt presence of adults who are comfortable and confident speaking the truth of acceptance and love for all people, for all kids, I think that goes really a long way to show those kids who might be struggling with feeling like they have to hide or they're not getting that support at home. But it also makes an impression on other kids who maybe they're hearing messaging from their own parents that it's not okay to be gay, right? And they're not learning about inclusivity. So I think, yeah, I feel like I'm hearing the overt theme of empowering our kids through love, acceptance for one another, and even themselves, right? knowing it's okay to just be who they are.
Yep, and just respect others, basically.
Thank you, Pam, for being here again today. You always impart such good information and really thoughtful tidbits that always keep me kind of having my wheels churning after we talk. Hopefully everyone has learned a little something or heard something helpful that might be useful to them or someone they know. And we will put the research links and the resources we mentioned in the show notes. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, please email us at dhbhs.media@hitchcock.org. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. That's the best way to make sure you don't miss a new episode. And we appreciate you listening.
And happy Pride Month. Let's celebrate our diversity.
Yeah. Happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride.